Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. Hope you're having an amazing day. You guys are probably also aware that the highest end RDNA 4 GPUs were initially rumoured to sport an MCM design, and there were several compute dies along with a bunch of other stuff all plonked together to form a more powerful whole. Now, subsequently, the rumours are that these GPUs, these high-end ones, are cancelled, but of course there are still monolithic dies which are N44 and 48, and we've discussed them quite extensively on the channel before, but basically 48 is the more performant of the two. It's got more compute units, more memory bandwidth, more memory, and so on and so forth, and will be roughly on par with something like a Radeon 7900 XTX, give or take 10-ish% according to who you ask. At this point, however, well, the GPUs are not exactly in retail, so final clock frequencies, driver-side optimization, and a bunch of other things could really affect the performance, not to mention the fact that the rumours could simply be wrong. With that said though, RDNA 5 is supposedly still on track to be an MCM design. I'm hearing some really good things about it. But, well, there is a very interesting patent which has actually emerged online, and this is on freepatentsonline.com. That's quite the name. You've got to admit, it does do what it says on the tin. Now, the publication date of this is the 13th of June 2024, but it was initially filed on, well, basically late December 2022, and the name of this is Configurable Multi-Die Graphics Processing Unit. I'm not going to read out this entire patent because it's 12 pages and there are a lot of diagrams. It's one of the reasons that I'm not on camera today because, well, quite frankly, you would just be seeing the patent anyway. But there are a couple of relevant sections and things I want to talk to you guys about it. I also want to give credit to Olrak29, who I believe was the first person to post about this on Twitter. So I will leave one, a link to their account, and two, a link directly to the patent. And of course, you guys can check it out and peruse at your leisure. Now, the abstract is quite interesting. This is the only thing that I'm going to read verbatim, but I'm going to skip over, the odd word or here or there. So basically it mentions that this GPU can be partitioned into multiple dies, referred to as GPU chiplets, and they can be configurable to collectively function and interface with an application as a single GPU in one mode or as multi-GPUs in another mode. And by dividing the GPU into multi-GPU chiplets, the processing system flexibly and cost-effectively configures the amount of active GPU physical resources based on this particular mode. It also mentions that it is quite cost-effectively because essentially you can just configure the GPU as required, either with different numbers of GPU chiplets, or you can even have different generations of technology coming together depending, again, on your usage case. Now, of course, these images are not 100% verbatim what we would have had in the final design, because ultimately this is a patent. And again, this particular design, I believe, is not what we're going to be seeing for RDNA 5. I've been told that there are some changes, although specifically I can't tell you exactly what right now, because I've had, well, let's just say a couple of conflicting pieces of information. But ultimately speaking, there are some changes that are going to be present for RDNA 5. For one, you simply have more shader dies, for example. But regardless of all of that, regardless of semantics, you can see in this first image, which again is on the first page, that there are, of course, multiple shader dies kind of plonked together under a front end. So in this particular case, you can see that there are 3 shader engines per front end, and well, there are 3 front ends. You have front end 0, 1, and finally 2, with a mode selector and a multimedia die, and these are all on presumably kind of like a base chip, like an interposer. And then figure 1 pretty much continues this, and then we also have figure 2 and figure 3 and so on, and you can see that basically this is a demonstration of the GPU acting in different modes. So again, let's say you have a game and the GPU is being told, okay, well, what I want you to do now is to just give all of your resources, all of your performance to this specific game. So let's say you're playing Cyberpunk, you've got all the ray tracing and all the goodies on, then obviously you're going to want that to be as powerful as possible. But, and this is just an example, I'm not saying this is exactly how it would work, but let's say you're running something like a virtual machine or hypervisor or something like that, and you say, well, I want to do some 3D modeling with this one, and it's kind of rendering in the background, but I also want to play this game, so I'm just going to kind of like delegate the resources or something like that. And it could be very interesting for a number of different scenarios. And then, of course, we can also see this more in figure 5, where basically we have different modes. So again, first mode, second mode, and third mode. I won't read out the entire flowchart here because, again, I'm trying to keep this, somewhat time sensitive for you guys, but you can pause the screen. But in the first mode, all shader engine dies of all GPU chiplets receive execution from the first front end die. The shader engines in the second mode of each GPU chiplets set and receive execute commands from the corresponding dies, and in the third mode, shader engine dies of the multiple GPU chiplets set, receive, and execute commands from the first front end die, and shader engine dies of GPU chiplets set corresponding to the second front end die and receive and execute commands from the second front end die. Well, that just read super well, but you get the idea. Ultimately, this is a very cool patent, and it's a great example of what AMD are working on internally. From my understanding, RDNA 4 was basically, and I mean here the chiplet variants, were essentially cancelled so that more resources can go to RDNA 5. It's going to be very interesting, honestly, to see just how performant RDNA 5 is. I've heard some really good things, but ultimately, I think we're so far away. Exact performance numbers are kind of meaningless at this point, but I do think that it's going to be a very interesting architecture, if nothing else. I will be very curious to see how NVIDIA responds in the long term, because obviously at the moment it seems that Blackwell is still going to be a monolithic die, that's GB202. I've heard that Rubin may not be, it could be Chiplet, but that was of course also the rumour for Blackwell for quite some time. So again, NVIDIA do seem to be less excited to move on to chiplets. There are a lot of moving parts for this. When you're talking about graphics, it's a lot easier, and I use the word easier with massive quotation marks, the size 1 trillion font. But when you're dealing with like compute stuff, it's not as difficult to have multiple dies or multiple GPUs working harmoniously together. But when you're trying to do graphic stuff, it becomes a lot trickier for a lot of different reasons. One of them, of course, is just simply latency. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all of these companies kind of work together on this. As for Intel, obviously Battlemage, that is rumoured to simply be monolithic. I've heard Celestial, well, I don't honestly know. Some people are telling me it is monolithic, others telling me that it's chiplet, so I'm just putting it as I'm just going to classify it as monolithic until I know differently. With that said, there is one last thing that I want to talk to you guys about. All of this stuff, it seems to be very image focused today, that's why I'm not on camera. But yeah, there was a very interesting article with Tom's Hardware, and I just didn't get around to it until today. But basically speaking, well, we're entering a new era, guys. I want you to get super excited. This is hype, because we're going to be entering CPU 2. So that's very cool. So this is a new company known as Flow Computing, a Finland-based startup, and they are stating that they have this new technology that allegedly can increase performance of a CPU by up to 100x. So what is this? Well, basically speaking, they have created a new chip, or I guess you could say a processor, known as a PPU, or Parallel Processing Unit. Now, this is kind of similar to what we've seen with things like NPUs and so on, in that it doesn't replace, let's say, a CPU, instead it augments it. Now, there are a lot of lofty claims here, and quite frankly, I'm not going to spend too long discussing this at this point, because at the moment they are, well, just kind of still making the claims. Obviously, at the end of the day, until something quite solid is shown, i.e. real-world performance, real-world benchmarks, you should take this stuff with a huge pinch of salt. And anyway, they state that we're going to see more of this by the second half of this year. So you know, hopefully, let's say in 3, 4, 5 months' time, we should have a much better understanding of where this is coming from. But anyway, I'm talking a load of crap. What does this actually do? Well, as you are probably aware, when you're talking about computers, and this is obviously vastly simplified, well, basically code gets executed, and the more parallel you can make the execution of code, in other words, the more stuff you can have with minimizing the latency and reducing bubbles in the execution pipeline, the faster it becomes. So basically what this PPU does, which I absolutely love the name for this bit, it's Parallel Processing Unit. So what it essentially does is it helps optimize and maximize the level of parallelism as code gets used. So in fact, there's a co-founder, Timo Valtonen, hopefully I've pronounced that correctly, I get the feeling no, they state, Flow intends to lead super CPU revolution through its radical new parallel performance unit PPU architecture, enabling up to 100x performance of any CPU. So yeah, basically what this seems to do, and I really stress, guys, that, you know, while it sounds cool in theory, this is really early stuff, and we're going to have to wait and see whether A, this even works, B, whether it actually comes to the fray. You know, they may go belly up or something else happens, and see whether it, well, there's just a lot of, you know, there's a lot of caveats. I could go here for quite a while, but basically what it seems to do anyway is looking at the code and before it's being executed by the processor, and then figure out how it can parallelize that code as much as possible. Theoretically, this can be used for a lot of different architectures. It could be used for cell phones, it could be used for laptops, it could be used for pretty much anything. So in theory, anyway, you could have this on like an Intel processor, an AMD processor, it could be used for ARM, you get the idea. Again, it is one of those things that sounds really cool, but I am gonna just, let's put it this way, I'm not gonna be holding my breath, and we'll see. I am cautiously optimistic, you know, that it could be pretty cool. If it is, of course, as performant as they say, or hell, even if it's like 25 or 50% as performant as they're claiming, I think that there's a very good chance that they're going to get snapped up by someone. You know, Nvidia, ARM, someone is going to want to purchase them because, well, you can just imagine, like, if they get snapped up and you could, if it does work, you know, across a lot of different code, especially stuff at like a data center, it would give a huge performance advantage. Again, though, I'm not going to be holding my breath. With that said, guys, I think that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully, you've enjoyed it. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Have an amazing day. Bye for now.